Hello viewers. The following stories are inspired by real events. However, the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story 1. The Old Painting of the Stall. In October 2018, at a bustling flea market in Portland, Oregon, Sarah, a young girl with a hobby of collecting unique and strange items, accidentally saw an old painting placed in a hidden corner of a stall. The painting was not large. The wooden frame was worn by time. But what attracted Sarah was the image of the little girl in the painting. The girl had big, round, black eyes, looking straight at the viewer with an innocent expression and a bit of indescribable sadness. Sarah felt a strange urge, as if there was an invisible string connecting her to this painting. She asked the seller about the origin of the painting, but he just shrugged and said he bought it at an auction to liquidate old furniture. Not knowing anything more about its history, Sarah still decided to buy the painting for a fairly cheap price. When she brought the painting home, she hung it in the living room. Friends and relatives who came to visit commented that the painting was quite ordinary. Some even found it a bit odd, with the girl's eyes looking too deep. "It looks a bit haunted," one of Sarah's friends commented when looking closely at the painting. "Her eyes seem to be following me." Sarah just smiled wryly. She didn't feel that way. She liked the mysterious and slightly melancholy look of the painting. But when night fell, and everything in the house was quiet, Sarah began to feel that something was wrong. One late night, while Sarah was sleeping soundly, she was suddenly awakened by a cold feeling that enveloped the entire room. She opened her eyes and looked at the painting hanging on the wall. In the dim moonlight shining through the window, she was startled to realize that the eyes of the little girl in the painting seemed to be looking straight at her. Not only that, she also felt like the corners of the girl's mouth were slightly raised, forming a faint smile, but it made Sarah feel extremely uneasy. At first, Sarah thought she was just dreaming or that the moonlight was creating an illusion. But the following nights, this strange phenomenon continued to repeat. The eyes of the little girl in the painting seemed to have their own life. They moved gently, sometimes looking left, sometimes looking right, and that faint smile sometimes appeared, then disappeared strangely. One evening, when Sarah was video chatting with a friend on the phone, she accidentally turned the camera towards the painting while talking. After ending the call, she reviewed the video and was horrified to realize that what she had suspected all along was true. In the video, while Sarah was talking, the eyes of the little girl in the painting clearly moved. Not only that, that faint smile also appeared. But this time it was no longer shy, but more clearly, like a terrifying mockery. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This painting was not normal. It was truly spooky. After watching the video over and over again on the phone, Sarah could not believe her eyes. The eyes of the little girl in the painting were really moving. And the smile was no longer an illusion. A cold fear spread throughout her body, making her shiver even though she was in a warm room. She quickly turned off her phone, throwing it on the bed as if she had just touched something disgusting. "No way, no way," Sarah muttered, trying to calm herself. "It must be the lighting, or the angle of the camera. It's just an old painting. Nothing scary." But deep down, Sarah knew that what she had just seen was not normal. She could not forget the scary eyes and strange smirk of the little girl in the painting. A feeling of unease and anxiety enveloped her, making it impossible for her to fall asleep again. That night, Sarah tossed and turned until morning. She did not dare to look at the painting anymore. She turned her face to the wall, trying to dispel the scary images in her mind. But no matter how hard she tried, the image of those moving eyes and shy smile still haunted her. The next morning, Sarah decided to find out more about the painting. She took it down to the kitchen and placed it on the table. The daylight made the painting look more normal, but Sarah still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She carefully examined every detail of the painting, hoping to find any sign of its strange origin. She turned the painting over, but found only a layer of dirt and a few small cracks in the wooden frame. There was no information about the artist or the history of the painting. Sarah sighed, knowing that finding its origin would not be easy. Over the next few days, Sarah began to pay more attention to the painting. She noticed that the strange phenomena seemed to only occur at night, when everything around was quiet and dark. During the day, the painting looked completely normal, with no signs of being haunted. But as night fell, Sarah began to feel the change. The eyes of the little girl in the painting seemed to come alive, following her as she moved around the room. Sometimes, Sarah even heard very small whispers coming from the painting. Unclear sounds, but they made her feel extremely creepy. One night, while Sarah was sitting alone in the living room watching TV, she suddenly felt someone looking at her. She turned her head and was horrified to see the eyes of the little girl in the painting staring straight at her. No longer innocent as before, but instead a cold and scary gaze. The faint smile also appeared, but this time it lasted longer. Like a malicious mockery, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She screamed in horror, jumped up and ran out of the living room. She stood in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to calm herself. She knew that this painting was more than just an inanimate object. It was alive, and it was haunting her. She had to do something before things got worse. After that terrifying night, Sarah was determined to get rid of the haunted painting at all costs. She could no longer live in such fear and uncertainty. The next morning, Sarah took the painting to an antique shop, hoping to sell it to someone. The shop owner, a stern-looking old man, examined the painting carefully. He shook his head, saying that the painting had no artistic value and refused to buy it. Sarah took the painting home in frustration. She tried calling friends and relatives, offering to give them the painting, but they all refused with different reasons. No one wanted to accept an item that Sarah described as haunted. In desperation, Sarah thought of destroying the painting. She took it to the basement, where she usually kept old, unused items. She placed the painting on the floor, grabbed a large hammer, and held it high. But just as she was about to strike the hammer, a shrill voice rang out in her head. Don't do that." Sarah stopped, startled, looking around the dark basement. There was no one there. She told herself that she was just imagining things. But the voice was too clear and scary. She lowered the hammer, feeling an indescribable unease. In the following days, the strange phenomena related to the painting became more and more serious. Sarah not only saw the girl's eyes in the painting moving, and the creepy smirk, sometimes, she also heard the girl whispering her name in the dark. Objects in her room occasionally moved on their own, and she often felt a cold, enveloping aura when she was near the painting. Sarah began to have trouble sleeping. She always felt like someone was watching her. Fear and fatigue made her irritable and easily angered. She knew she couldn't go on like this. One night, Sarah decided to find out where the painting came from. She went online, searching for information about the artists and old paintings with similar images. After hours of searching, she finally found an old newspaper article on a local website. The article told of a terrible fire that had burned down a house in the suburbs of Portland in the 1930s. A little girl named Emily had died in the fire. The article also included an old photo. And Sarah was horrified to realize that the girl in the photo was the girl in the painting she had picked up. As Sarah continued reading the article, she learned that Emily was the only daughter of a poor artist. She loved painting and often modeled for her father. The painting that Sarah owned was probably one of the artist's last works before he died of a serious illness shortly after the fire. Sarah felt a deep sadness when she learned of Emily's tragic story. She understood that the girl's soul was probably still trapped in the painting. Unable to move on, she decided to try to help Emily find peace. That night, Sarah took the painting to her bedroom and placed it on the bedside table. She sat down, looked into the sad eyes of the girl in the painting and said, "Emily, I know you've suffered a lot. I'm sorry for everything that happened to you. I will help you find peace." As Sarah finished speaking, a soft white light emanated from the painting. The eyes of the little girl in the painting closed slightly, and the creepy smirk disappeared, replaced by a peaceful and gentle smile. Sarah felt a strange warmth spread throughout the room. Since that night, the strange phenomena related to the painting have disappeared. Sarah still keeps the painting by her side, as a reminder of Emily's tragic story. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, Sarah still feels like someone is watching her. But it is no longer a scary gaze, but a warm and grateful gaze. Sarah believes that Emily has finally found peace, and her soul has been freed from the haunted painting. However, Sarah never told anyone about what she had experienced, because she knew that no one would believe this strange story. The painting still hangs in Sarah's living room, a silent memory of a young soul that has found its final rest. Story 2. The painting fell on the street. It was Halloween night in 1995 in Salem, Massachusetts, and the air was chilly and mysterious. Jessica, a 16-year-old girl with long black hair and big round eyes, was on her way home after an evening of trick-or-treating with her friends. Her canvas bag was full of chocolate bars and candy. As she walked down a deserted street on Elm Street, Jessica suddenly saw something lying on the sidewalk under the yellow light of a street lamp. Curious, she stopped and bent down to look. It was a painting, not very large, framed in an old dark wooden frame. The painting depicted a middle-aged man with a stern face and deep eyes staring straight ahead. The painting seemed to have been abandoned by someone, perhaps during a house cleaning or moving. Jessica picked up the painting, lightly brushing off the dust on its surface. Although the man in the painting did not seem friendly, Jessica felt a strange attraction to the painting. She thought it could be a unique decoration for her bedroom. Someone must have dropped it, Jessica muttered, and decided to take the painting home. When she got home, Jessica showed her parents the newly found painting. Her father just shrugged and said it was an old painting with nothing special. And her mother advised her to throw it away because it looked a bit creepy. But Jessica decided to keep the painting. She carefully cleaned the frame, then hung it on the empty wall above the desk in her bedroom. In the early days, everything was normal. Jessica occasionally looked at the painting, trying to guess who the man in the painting was, and why the painting had been abandoned. His eyes seemed to be following her, but Jessica did not feel afraid, only curious. However, as the night fell, Jessica began to feel that something was wrong. She often woke up in the middle of the night with a cold feeling covering the whole room. When she looked at the painting, she felt as if the eyes of the man in the painting were staring at her in the darkness. One night, While Jessica was lying in bed reading, she suddenly heard a small noise coming from the painting. She looked up in surprise and was horrified to see that one of the man's eyes in the painting seemed to have blinked slightly. At first, Jessica thought she was just seeing things, but she couldn't concentrate on her book anymore. She just stared at the painting, waiting for something to happen. A while later, when Jessica had almost fallen asleep, she was awakened by another noise, this time more clearly, like a soft sigh coming from the painting. Jessica turned on the night light and stared at the painting. The man's face in the painting was still as solemn as ever. But Jessica felt that there was some strange change. His eyes seemed to look deeper, and the corners of his mouth were slightly pursed, as if he was trying to suppress something. Jessica felt a vague fear begin to creep into her mind. The little girl didn't understand why she felt so uneasy looking at a quiet painting. But deep down, she knew that this painting was not normal. It was hiding a terrifying secret, and she had probably brought it into her house by accident. In the following nights, Jessica did not dare to sleep well. She always felt a cold gaze watching her from the wall. Every time she woke up, she would look at the painting, and almost every time she saw the eyes of the man in the painting staring at her in the darkness. It was no longer a slight wink, but a fixed gaze, as if he was trying to communicate with her. One evening, while Jessica was doing her homework, she felt someone calling her name. She raised her head, but there was no one in the room. She thought she had misheard. But then the voice called out again, this time clearer, a deep, husky male voice, coming from the painting. Jessica. She shivered, her heart pounding in her chest. She quickly stood up, took a few steps back, and stared at the painting in horror. The man's face in the painting was still as stern as ever, but his eyes seemed to be looking at her with something sad? Or was it threatening? Jessica wasn't sure. She decided to tell her parents about the strange things that were happening, but they just thought she was imagining things. Her father joked that she must have watched too many horror movies on Halloween. I really heard the voice, Dad, Jessica tried to explain, her voice full of worry. And his eyes. I saw them move. Her mother patted her head, her voice gentle. My dear, you must be just nervous. That painting is just an inanimate object. There is nothing to be afraid of. Feeling that no one believed her, Jessica began to feel lonely and scared. She tried to avoid looking at the painting, but it seemed to always attract her eyes. Every time she looked at it, she felt a cold aura enveloping her. One night, Jessica was sleeping soundly when she was suddenly awakened by a loud noise. She jumped up and looked around the room. Everything was still dark, but she felt a terrifying presence in the room. She timidly looked towards the painting, and was horrified to realize that the man in the painting was no longer looking straight. His face had turned, and his eyes were staring at the girl lying on the bed. Not only that, his mouth was slightly open, as if he was about to say something. Jessica could no longer hold it in. She screamed in horror, turned on the night light, and jumped out of bed. She stood in the middle of the room, trembling as she stared at the painting. The man in the painting was still looking at her, and this time, she was sure she saw the corners of his mouth curl up into a terrifying smile. Tears streaming down her cheeks, Jessica ran out of the bedroom, rushed down the stairs, and called her parents. When they ran up to her room, the painting was still hanging silently on the wall, and the man in the painting was staring straight ahead, his face expressionless. Jessica's parents looked at her worriedly, not knowing what was going on, but Jessica knew, deep down, that this painting was alive, and it was haunting her life. She had to do something before it took over her completely. After that night, Jessica's parents finally realized that something was really wrong with the painting. Although they did not see or hear what Jessica went through, their daughter's fear and despair were all too real. They decided to help Jessica find out the origin of the painting. Hoping to solve these strange phenomena, they searched online, visited the local library, and even asked around to local antique collectors. After several days of searching, they finally found a small article in an old newspaper from the 1930s. The article told of a man named Elias Thorne, a local artist known for his haunting portraits. He was said to have died mysteriously in his studio, and some believed his spirit still lingered somewhere in his work. Jessica and her parents examined the painting closely. The man's face bore a striking resemblance to the black and white photo of Elias Thorne that had been included in the article. A chill ran down Jessica's spine. She felt like she was privy to a dark secret. Over the next few days, the haunting of the painting grew worse. Jessica not only saw Elias Thorne's eyes moving, and his creepy smile, she also began to hear more distinct whispers, cold and threatening words ringing in her ears. Sometimes, she even felt a cold hand touching her in the dark. One night, while Jessica was sleeping, she dreamed that she was standing in a dark and damp studio. Elias Thorne appeared before her, his face pale and full of pain. He said to Jessica in a hoarse voice, "I'm trapped. I need a new body to escape." Jessica woke up in a panic, cold sweat all over her body. She knew that Elias Thorne was trying to take over her body. She had to do something to stop this. With the help of her parents, Jessica sought out a paranormal expert in Salem. She examined the painting and confirmed that it was indeed haunted. She explained that Elias Thorne must have performed some kind of evil ritual before he died, which trapped his spirit in the painting. The only way to free his spirit and stop the haunting was to destroy the painting completely. That night, Jessica and her parents took the painting to the backyard. They poured gasoline on it and set it on fire. The fire raged fiercely, burning the wooden frame and canvas. When the painting was completely burned, a scream of horror filled the air, followed by an eerie silence. From that night on, Jessica was no longer haunted by the painting. She gradually regained peace in her life. However, the memories of those terrifying nights with the haunted painting still haunted her. She never dared to look at any of the old portraits again, and she always felt a vague unease every night. The story of the haunted painting on Elm Street has become a terrifying warning to those who dare to bring home strange items without knowing their origin. Story 3. The Painting in the Abandoned House. In the summer of 2003, 4 college students, Liam, Maya, Noah and Chloe, all have a hobby of exploring abandoned places and creepy stories. They heard about an old dilapidated farmhouse, deep in a small forest near Amityville, New York, which had been abandoned for many years after a mysterious tragedy. Rumors of strange noises and ghosts in the abandoned house aroused the curiosity of the group. On a Sunday afternoon, they decided to drive to that farmhouse. The path leading into the forest was narrow and bumpy, the tall trees blocking most of the sunlight, creating a gloomy and quiet atmosphere. When they arrived, they saw a 2-story wooden house that was in serious disrepair, with rotten boards, broken windows, and a moss-covered roof. A sense of dread pervaded the area. "Are you sure you want to go in?" Chloe asked, her voice a little hesitant. "It doesn't look good." Liam, who always seemed the bravest of the group, sneered. "Don't worry, Chloe. It's just an old house. We'll explore a bit and then go home." The group carefully entered the house. Dust and cobwebs covered every corner. The air was damp and had an unpleasant musty smell. They passed through empty rooms, peeling walls, and broken pieces of furniture scattered everywhere. When they reached the attic, a dark and cramped space, they suddenly saw a painting leaning against a corner of the wall. The painting was not large, but what immediately caught their attention was the image of a little girl in the painting. The girl had strange green skin, big round black eyes staring straight at the viewer, and was wearing a simple white dress that had turned yellow. "Oh my God, what is this?" Maya exclaimed, her face full of surprise and a little fear. Noah moved closer, examining the painting carefully. "It looks strange. Why is her skin green?" Liam shrugged. "Maybe the paint is faded. But it's pretty unique." He looked at the painting with interest. "Why don't we take it home? For our living room?" Chloe and Maya seemed to disagree, but Noah seemed interested in the idea. Finally, after a bit of debate, they decided to take the painting home. Liam carefully dusted it off and carried it downstairs. When they returned to their rented house near the university, Liam hung the painting on the empty wall in the living room. The painting with the green-skinned girl immediately became the center of attention. Friends who came over felt curious and a little creepy when they looked at it. "It looks like it's looking at me," one of Maya's friends commented. "Her eyes, they really have a soul." Liam just laughed. "You guys are being too suspicious. It's just an old painting." But when night fell and everyone went to sleep, Jessica, who slept in the living room on the old couch, began to feel something was wrong. She often woke up in the middle of the night with an unusually cold feeling. When she looked at the painting hanging on the wall, in the dim light, she felt like the eyes of the green-skinned girl were staring at her. And sometimes, she even caught a glimpse of a blurry figure standing next to the painting, wearing a long white dress. Maya began to have more trouble sleeping ever since the painting was hung in the living room. She often woke up in the middle of the night with a cold feeling and an indescribable unease. Every time she opened her eyes, she felt like someone was looking at her, and her gaze would reflexively turn towards the painting. In the dim light, the green-skinned girl seemed to stand out more. Her jet-black eyes seemed to be staring at Maya. One night, Maya woke up to a slight noise, like someone was shuffling on the wooden floor. She listened, but the noise stopped immediately. She tried to reassure herself that it was just the wind or something from outside. But her unease did not lessen. A few nights later, Maya woke up to another strange dream. She dreamed that she was standing in the abandoned house, and the green-skinned girl from the painting walked out, approaching her with a pale smile. The smile was not friendly, but rather had something strange and scary. Maya tried to scream, but could not make a sound. The girl reached out, her long, pale fingers touching her cheek, cold as ice. Maya woke up with a start, her body covered in a cold sweat. The next morning, Maya told Liam and Chloe about her strange dreams and uneasy feelings. But they just dismissed her as imagining things. "You've been watching too many horror movies, Maya," Liam teased. "It's just a painting, nothing to be scared of." Chloe agreed. "I think the painting is fine. Maybe you're just stressed out about your homework." Only Noah listened and seemed to trust Maya more. "Are you sure you're okay, Maya? I've noticed you've been feeling a little tired lately. I really feel like there's something wrong with that painting," Maya said, her voice filled with concern. "I keep hearing strange noises at night, and I always feel like someone's watching me." The following nights, the strange phenomena became more and more obvious. Not only did Maya feel like she was being watched, but she also heard very small whispers coming from the painting at night. The whispers sounded like a little girl saying something very sad and mournful. One night, while Maya was sleeping on the sofa, she was suddenly awakened by a loud noise, like something falling on the floor. She turned on the flashlight on her phone and looked around the room. Everything was still intact, except for the painting. The green-skinned girl in the painting was no longer looking straight, but her face had turned towards Maya, who was lying on the sofa. Her jet-black eyes seemed to be looking at Maya with something angry. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't dare to take her eyes off the painting. Suddenly, she saw the corner of the girl's mouth in the painting slightly curl up, forming a faint smile. But this time it wasn't gentle, but rather scary and threatening. Maya screamed in horror, jumped up and ran out of the living room, rushing into Liam and Noah's room. She told them about what she had just seen, her voice trembling and filled with fear. This time, Liam and Noah were no longer suspicious. They saw the real fear in Maya's eyes, and they knew that something terrible was happening to the painting they had brought back from the Amityville house. They decided to get to the bottom of this story together. After hearing Maya's story, Liam and Noah were no longer suspicious. They knew that this painting was more than just a strange old object. There was a terrifying supernatural force lurking within it. The three of them decided to investigate the history of the house and the painting together, hoping to solve these strange phenomena. Chloe, still scared, agreed to join in. They began searching online, looking up old local newspapers and websites about the history of Amityville. After hours of searching, they discover a tragic story about a family who lived in that farmhouse in the 1920s. The family had a daughter named Willow, who suffered from a rare disease that caused her skin to turn a pale green. Willow died at a young age in an unexplained accident right at that house. Some locals rumored that Willow loved painting, and often painted portraits of herself. They believed that her spirit still lingered in the house, and perhaps resided in one of her paintings. Hearing this story, Maya felt a deep sadness. The green-skinned girl in the painting was probably Willow. Perhaps she was feeling lonely and lost, and that was why she tried to contact Maya. That night, the four decided to stay up late to watch the painting. They sat silently in the living room, their eyes fixed on the image of the green-skinned girl. When the clock struck midnight, a sudden cold air rushed into the room, causing all four of them to shiver. The lights in the room flickered slightly. "Are you guys cold?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. Liam and Noah nodded, their faces filled with worry as well. Maya was silent. She felt a strange urge to move closer to the painting. Suddenly, a slight sound came from the direction of the painting. They saw the corners of the girl's mouth in the painting slightly curl up, forming a faint smile. But this time, that smile was no longer scary, but carried a faint sadness. "Willow?" Maya called out her name softly. Immediately, the painting shook slightly. The eyes of the little girl in the painting opened wide, looking straight at Maya with a somewhat pleading look. A faint whisper rang out in the quiet space, sounding like the rustling of leaves. "Help me." All four of them were shocked. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. What do you want us to help you with?" Maya asked timidly. A green tear fell from the corner of the little girl's eye in the painting. Then, the image in the painting began to fade, as if a thin mist was covering it. "She's trying to say something," Noah said, his face full of tension. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through the room, causing the window to swing open. The light objects in the room were blown away. The painting fell to the floor, shattering into many pieces. When everything calmed down, the four of them looked at each other in shock. The painting was broken, but they felt like there was a change in the atmosphere. The cold and uneasy feeling was gone. That night, Maya slept soundly for the first time since the painting was brought home. She no longer had strange dreams. The next morning, they decided to clean up the broken pieces of the painting. When Liam picked up a piece, he was surprised to see a small inscription engraved on the back of the frame: Willow. My beloved daughter, rest in peace. The four of them were silent. They understood that Willow had finally found peace. They buried the broken pieces of the painting under the old tree behind the house, as a prayer for her soul to be released. Since then, their house has not been haunted anymore. But the story of the green-skinned girl in the painting is still an unforgettable memory for them. A terrifying testament to the unsolved mysteries that still exist around us. If you find this story interesting, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel to follow other stories of karma and retribution.